This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
So in John chapter 10, starting with verse 11, Jesus is, remember, he's still talking to these Pharisees and Sadducees who were challenging him. In one sense of the word, they were challenging him because that was the way they normally taught, still do to this day. The Jewish way of teaching is debate. And so they'll throw something out or throw a topic out, and they'll debate it. And then this will go on in class. And it can be very interesting debate. It can be very loud debate. So there was some of that because that was just kind of the way they did it. But there was also a lot of the criticism and the critical aspect of the shepherds in that they were trying to twist Jesus up and to try to get him to stumble and to say something that they could jump on. And you'll notice that he'll say things and then they think, we've got him, and they jump on him. And in fact, it's just Jesus laying the groundwork for them to teach them something. And some of them responded, some of them didn't. Very few of them really responded. But Jesus' approach was that Jewish approach to teaching, which was open debate. And he didn't mind it. It didn't bother him because he knew exactly what he needed to teach. There was some of that going on here, but a lot of it, as I said, was them trying to trip Jesus up. And so this is going on, and Jesus says some things in this passage that are pretty interesting, pretty amazing. And so let's start with chapter 10, verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. Now, this encounter between Jesus and the Pharisees would absolutely send the Pharisees into an uproar, because they considered themselves to be the shepherds of Israel. There was kind of a title that they felt like it was a title of honor, of course, and they felt like they deserved that, to be treated with that kind of, we are the shepherds of Israel, and they felt like they deserved that kind of respect. And now Jesus stepped into the scene, and he has exposed them as being these self-serving, self-centered frauds. And in verses 11 through 15, Jesus contrasts himself with the religious leaders. He says that I am the shepherd and the Pharisees are nothing more than hirelings. And he says, let me prove it. And he gives them two examples. And in these two examples, he draws this contrast of who they are and who he is. And in the process of doing that, it helps us to understand what it is that Jesus is wanting to do, what his will is, what his purpose, what his plan is for coming for you specifically. The first thing that he says is there's a difference in the redemption factor, the redemption of the sheep. He said, I am the good shepherd that lays down his life. There's this redemption value to what Christ does. As we saw last week, there are really two kinds of sheep pens, one in the country and where the shepherd would stay with the sheep, and one in the town or village that several shepherds would use, oftentimes in bad weather or stormy weather, or sometimes when the seasons was just way too cold or something like that. And they would hire a gatekeeper or a watchman to watch the sheep at night. There wasn't an issue with wolves and stuff like that because they were in the village, they were in town. They needed somebody to watch them so that nobody would come and steal the sheep. And so really the only thing that this hireling had to do was to watch the gate and to make sure that nobody stole the sheep. And this hired man wasn't necessarily a shepherd. He could have been, but he wasn't necessarily a shepherd. It was just a job for him. And the sheep really didn't matter to him, nor did the sheep consider him to be a shepherd. They didn't follow him. He didn't build a relationship with them. He could call them and they wouldn't follow. He had no vested interest in the sheep. Now, the other sheep pen was out in the country, and it was a more dangerous place, and they would build this wall around, and the shepherd would put his sheep in there at night, and then he would lie down in the gateway, and he would become basically the security system for the sheep. Now, sometimes those shepherds would have to go. They get sick or, had a family emergency or something like that. And they would hire one of these hirelings that would take care of those sheep pens in the city to come out and watch those sheep pens at night. And they didn't care. I mean, they really had no vested interest other than maybe they knew the shepherd or something like that. So if a wolf came, it was possible that they wouldn't do anything about it. They were just like, hey, my life is more valuable than a sheep. And I mean, really, how many sheep can a wolf eat? So there was this sense that there wasn't a real commitment to the sheep. And so Jesus is talking about that. And he's basically comparing them to these guys. When you're in the city, when you're in the village, when you're in your own safe, secure little world, he's talking to the Pharisees, it's real easy for you to do your job. You go do your job, and everybody says, well, you're doing your job, that's what you do. But when you're into a risky situation where you really have to face up to some odd circumstances, you tend to run. You tend to step down. You aren't as committed. And you're basically frauds. And so that was this picture that he was drawing about them, and he compares these Pharisees to these hired workers. And then he compares himself to the shepherd, and he says, I'm the shepherd that will lay down his life for the sheep. Interestingly enough, they didn't know it at the time, but what Jesus was saying was that I'm going to lay down my life for the sheep. I would lay down my life for the sheep, and in fact, knowing that he was going to lay down his life for the sheep. In fact, in a letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul described it this way, Romans chapter 5, verses 7 and 8, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good one would dare even to die. But God showed his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It was willing. It was by choice. It was emphatic. There was a purpose. Christ knew he was going to die. There was never a question in Jesus' mind what he was there for, what he was going to accomplish. He knew he was going to die. And the things that he says, as he's teaching his disciples all along, you begin to understand that Jesus is coming from this perception of I'm going to die, I'm also going to rise again, and the impact that would make on his disciples. Without them even understanding it at the time, it didn't make a whole lot of sense at the time. This is the way things happen in your life. There are things in your life that happen, and you don't even know why they happen. They don't make a whole lot of sense. God teaches you something, or you find something in the Word that really, really touches you, but it doesn't really have an impact on your life until later, when you really, really need it. Until something happens in your life where you really need God's Word to make a difference in your life. And that something comes back and does something in your life and gives you an answer, gives you an application, gives you a principle that can change your life. So God says that I'm working in your life, and it's not just to teach you about what's going on right now in your life, but to prepare you for things that are to come. In contrast, the Pharisees weren't about to lay down their life for the sheep. That didn't matter to them. They weren't about to lay down their life for God's people. And there was this contrast. Jesus said, I will not only am willing to lay down my life for my people, but I'm going to lay down my life. In fact, in John 15, later on, a few chapters later, I don't know when we'll get to John 15, but a few chapters later, Jesus says this, greater love has no man than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. He says, I'm going to do this, guys. They didn't understand it at the time, but later on, it began to make sense to them. Now, so there was this redemption factor that Jesus was talking about. One of the things that made him so significantly and powerfully focused as a rabbi, as a teacher, was that he was a rabbi and a teacher who came to redeem his students. He wasn't just there to teach them about something or teach them about some truth and then let the chips fall where they will. He came there to actually lead them into eternity. That was his whole focus. Not only to lead them, but to go with them into eternity.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.